Hello and welcome to the Tonearm, where we connect you with the people and ideas moving culture forward. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. This week, we're putting the Tonearm's needle on pop chart analyst Chris Molanphy. For almost a decade, Chris has hosted Hit Parade, Slate's monthly show on the history behind the Billboard charts. He also writes Slate's long-running Why Is This Song Number One column, and he wrote a book on Lil Nas X's Old Town Road for Duke University Press. Chris and I talk about how a Netflix episode can send a 40-year-old song back into the charts, why he refuses to believe in a guilty pleasure, and what changes in an artist's career when they keep reinventing instead of repeating a formula. And now, here's Chris Molanphy. I have this little running thesis that I'd like to either have you co-sign or disabuse me of.
Okay.
It seems like over the last 6 months or so in particular, the artist deep dives that you've done seem to be really preoccupied with artists who are kind of renowned for like a mutability or a reinvention. Was that intentional on your part? Would you agree with that? And if so, what attracts you to that through a chart analyst point of view?
Interesting. I'm thinking of the last 6 months. Bowie is the obvious example. Billy Idol, yes, mutability.
Donna Summer?
Technically, we were rerunning the Donna Summer episode. That's an episode I did back in 2017, but yes, she's definitely mutable. Okay, you know what turns me on and makes a great Hit Parade subject? And this would even apply to one I did in February when I compared the careers of John Denver and Olivia Newton-John, which shouldn't have worked. And I've gotten both head scratches and praise for that episode. I love an artist who defies genre or cultural expectations. That's what I'm especially turned on by. I love the fact that you look at someone like Olivia Newton-John's career and people forget that she was a country star.
That's right.
For the first half decade of her career, before Grease. Like when she died a couple of years ago, everybody was doing still shots of her in Grease or Physical. If her career had ended in 1977, she would have been remembered as a big country star. I once compared her to Taylor Swift. I say that there are whole generations of Taylor Swift fans who may barely know that Taylor Swift started in country music, like Olivia Newton-John. Bowie is a more obvious example given all his cultural changes over the years. Another one that to me is one of my sleepers is my Pointer Sisters episode. Yet another group who they scored one of their first major hits on the country charts, Fairy Tale. They won a country Grammy in 1974 or 75, I think. They scored an R&B #1 hit the same year. They scored their country hit with Fairy Tale. And then they, added new wave keyboards and turned into this bouncy synth pop group in the 80s. Any artist who defies convention and proves that hit making can kind of come in any guise, that's a big turn on for me. That to me is a Hit Parade topic.
So it's not even just necessarily the genre exploration or genre hopping, it's being successful while doing it.
Sure.
That is sort of interesting, yeah.
Hit Parade, I call it a podcast of pop chart history. The artists in question need to have made some kind of dent on the charts. It's not that I am a hater of indie rock or left field pop. My favorite band of the 21st century is LCD Soundsystem, and LCD Soundsystem have had scarcely any hits at all. Yeah, as popular as they seem to be, their popularity is largely a mirage and based mostly in New York City. And I say that with great love and respect. I once did an episode about the three angry young men of 70s British rock, Elvis Costello, Joe Jackson, and Graham Parker, and their chart history is scant. You have this moment where Elvis scores a couple of random top 40 hits in the 80s, this moment where Joe Jackson is actually the biggest pop hit maker of the three of them, and a very brief moment where Graham Parker looks like he's hitting the Hot 100, but then he kind of recedes very quickly. So that was mostly an excuse because I love all three of those artists and I wanted to do something about what the angry young man thing meant. But generally, I'm looking for chart impact for a subject for Hit Parade. As I often say, the charts don't mean everything, but they don't mean nothing.
Yeah.
They give you a window into understanding how artists are received by the public. And some of the apocryphal stories about rock and roll and pop music revolve to some degree around the charts. The famous story that 30,000 people bought the Velvet Underground's first album, but all of them formed a band. The reason why people use that very specific number is because Lou Reed told it to Brian Eno, reportedly, and he was checking his charts and royalty statements when he came up with that number.
Never a good indicator of what's actually sold.
No.
Not the royalty statement.
Certainly not the royalty statement. That's for damn sure. But that's an album that I think Velvet Underground and Nico peaked at, 195 or something like that. Yet it's a totemic album.
Yeah. Bowie is an interesting one as it relates to the stories the charts do and do not tell because, and again, whether this is apocryphal or not, it's reached something of a truism, especially within the business, which was that David was always bigger outside of America than in America.
Oh, yeah.
He remained a chart-topping singles artist, especially, in Western Europe, well after his sell-by date here. He was always more renowned than sort of commercially successful.
That's right.
You are primarily concerned with American charts, yes?
Yes, because it's what I know. It's an American show. I have to start somewhere. I have done several episodes that have focused on the British charts. The Britpop episode, by necessity, is mostly about the British charts because Britpop, other than a couple of Oasis hits, really didn't hit here. My UK Christmas number ones show from 2018 is all about the British charts because that is such a fascinating phenomenon. If you are a chart fan, the fact that a country cares as much about the number one song the week of Christmas as the Brits do is fascinating. But yes, primarily I am focused on the American charts and most specifically the Billboard charts because they are the Bible of charts. And the Hot 100 in particular is still to this day, for all its flaws, and it has many, it is the best formulated chart, the way it averages different kinds of consumption into one chart to rule them all, as I like to call it.
Yeah. When you say that, I hear that as there's a real earnest attempt to have it approximate what's going on in the world, right? It doesn't seem like it's not a construct, or it's a construct that's meant to reflect reality.
It's absolutely a construct. I often get interviewed and I feel like I am standing in for Billboard and defending their charts, even though I don't actually work for the magazine. No chart is perfect, and Billboard has tweaked the rules. One of the reasons why the Hot 100 has lasted nearly 7 decades is that it's adaptable. It does not work exactly the same way it worked in 1958. On the other hand, very broadly speaking, its rules attempt to balance different forms of consumption in a similar way. The Hot 100 has always included at least 2 pools of data, primarily sales of songs and radio airplay. And I call those 2 forms of consumption active fandom and passive fandom. That to me is why the Hot 100 works, because radio is a very passive medium. You're leaning back or you're sitting in your car and letting somebody throw music at you. And the radio stations have researched the crap out of the songs they play because they know what's going to make you stay on the station, what's going to make you change the station. That is one form of consumption. The other form of consumption is when you actually go in and pick the song and say, I want to buy that song or I want to stream that song. Those 2 forms of consumption give you, if you average them out right, a pretty good read of what's most popular in America in any given week. The other thing I say about the charts is that they only tell you what's popular 1 week at a time, which may sound obvious, but I think people think that the peak that a song reaches is kind of its stamp for all time.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many hits that missed the top 10, the top 40, the Hot 100 entirely that are now legendary. I did a whole episode about them called Legacy Hits. The one I love to point to that everybody talks about is Tiny Dancer by Elton John. Peaked at number 41, was never counted down by Casey Kasem. Not a top 40 hit. And yet, if I asked you, give me Elton John's 5 most definitive hits, you're going to name Benny and the Jets, you're going to name Rocket Man, but you're probably going to name Tiny Dancer. And it never made the top 40, unlike those other 2 hits I just rattled off.
Yeah, it was stunning to me to hear that because, again, I had the same idea going into that discussion was that, this just never occurred to me, the role that Almost Famous played in that song's retro iconic status.
Or what Stranger Things did for Kate Bush a couple of years ago. That went from a number 30 hit, her only American top 40 hit, by the way, to a number 3 hit. That's insane. I could never have predicted Running Up That Hill, one of my favorite singles of all time, would wind up a top 3 hit in America in the 2020s and be consumed by armies of Zoomers. That I couldn't have seen coming.
Well, that's something that's so intriguing because in this world of so many sync placements, so much media now that needs music,
right?
These songs can just drop out of the sky randomly.
And it's not as if this didn't happen prior to the digitization of the charts. If you go back to 1986, there were a couple of hits in the top 40 that were made by movies. There was the Beatles' Twist and Shout was brought back to the charts in the summer of '86. I just read an article yesterday celebrating the 40th anniversary of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and that movie made Twist and Shout into a Gen X hit. I remember as a teenager, I thought I knew the Beatles, and I don't think I knew Twist and Shout all that well until I saw Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And then later that year, Rob Reiner's Stand By Me made the Benny King song a top 10 hit for a second time. When you think about what Wayne's World did for Bohemian Rhapsody in 1992, it became a bigger hit the second time. It was already a top 10 hit in 1976 in America. It became a number 2 hit in America in 1992 because of the twin forces of Freddie Mercury's untimely passing and Wayne's World. So it's not as if this didn't exist prior to the digital era, but the digital era just accelerates this. It makes it so much faster. Because of the way the 4th of July fell this year, 4th of July was a Saturday this year, which means it kind of appeared at the end of a tracking week. As a result of that, songs that were America themed did better on the charts than they ever had before. And Toby Keith now has a new biggest not number one, I think it reached number 11, a new biggest pop hit of all time because his Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue came back not only to the top 40, but to number 11 in the year 2026. So you can't make this stuff up.
Since the 70s, has there been a stranger top 10 hit than Bohemian Rhapsody?
Gosh, I don't know. Now you're making me rack my brain. I would point to maybe This Is America by Childish Gambino, which was a number 1 hit in 2018, fueled mostly by controversy and a really spectacular and strange music video. That's a very odd number 1 hit. Rich Men North of Richmond in 2023 is a weird number 1 hit.
Yeah.
A guy singing in a field with an acoustic guitar and a dog at his feet. That's a strange number 1 hit. Bohemian Rhapsody is pretty weird. It's weird, but it's so operatic. It's kind of catchy. It's very catchy, obviously. I hesitate to say that it's weirder than some other hits. I mean, if you go back to 1971, Paul McCartney's first solo number 1 hit was Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey, a song that changes tempo in the middle and frankly sounds like a Monty Python sketch. I still can't believe that was a number 1 hit in America. That is such a British song, and yet it was a number 1 hit.
We're so sorry, Uncle Albert. We're so sorry if we caused you any pain. We're so sorry, Uncle Albert. But there's no one left at home, and I believe I'm gonna rain.
I get suckered into this every year. I just recently watched the Queen performance at Live Aid. It comes around on social media or whatever every year. This year I was watching it, and the thought that came into my head was every human being interested in music should watch this.
Sure.
It's shocking. Like even now watching it, I'm like, man, they really did that.
Yeah, and it kind of captured what Queen did best. And frankly, I don't think I'm insulting Queen too much when I say their best days were behind them.
Yeah.
Not only was Freddie going to die in another 6 years, but, they'd recorded all of their best hits. Even if you include some of the latter day ones like I Want to Break Free or Radio Gaga, those had already happened. They didn't even play all of their great songs in that Live Aid performance. They play Hammer to Fall, which is like the 3rd single from the album with Radio Gaga on it.
Yeah.
It's the majesty of Mercury as a frontman and his ability to command a crowd that makes that performance great. It's not even the set list. If I showed you the set list sight unseen, you wouldn't say, oh, this doesn't look like a great Queen set list. And yet it is.
Yeah, it really is him.
Oh, yeah.
The band sounds great. The way they can reproduce their sound on stage is phenomenal, but really he's stunning. And his voice is like, it makes no sense to me that that was really his voice.
8th wonder of the world, Freddie Mercury's voice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seriously.
You mentioned the Donna Summer episode's a little bit older now. The rebroadcast of that and the Billy Idol episode, I found them both incredibly inspiring. I find Billy Idol's story, like the silliness of his biography aside, he's quite an artist.
He's fascinating because, as I said in the episode, okay, if I ask you, what is the genre of Billy Idol? There's no one answer to that question. The guy was about 4 or 5 different things. Was he new wave? Well, kind of. Was he punk? Yes. And I took pains to point that out. Like, this guy is very legitimately punk. He was part of the Bromley contingent. He was there when the Sex Pistols were breaking. He is not a poser. He was the real deal. And then he pretty shamelessly went pop. So he's pop, he's punk, he's new wave, he's arguably metal. He hung out with metalheads, and he's in that Sam Kinison video next to all these long-haired, hair metal guys. He's even a little bit funky, like several of his songs. He's a dance artist. Several of his songs were major club hits. Dancing with Myself was a club hit. Hot in the City was a club hit. White Wedding. He can't be put into any one box. That's what makes him a great hit parade subject, because it shows how mutable popularity is. I love the fact that the Hot 100 as a chart, it's called the pop chart. And I think we now have a definition of pop that, pop is Ariana Grande, or it's, Sabrina Carpenter. It's a specific strain of sugary, sweet pop music. By the way, I love all that stuff.
Yeah.
Pop is also just short for popular, and anything that catches the public's fancy is pop. Billy Idol was a pretty great pop star as much as he was a rock star.
Yeah, that's right. The thing that your episode pointed out to me or reminded me of was he was all the things you just articulated on one album.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't like he went through these phases, although there's phases, but any given record could travel all that musical terrain. It's actually very impressive. It's very impressive.
It is. One of his top 10 hits, he only has a handful of top 10 hits. One of his top 10 hits is a rockabilly song. He basically took To Be a Lover, which was an R&B record the first time, by the way, and kind of turns it into electro rockabilly. Who does that? His only number one hit is a cover of Moni Moni by Tommy James and the Shondells, which is sort of like classic 60s pop. He did it all, and he didn't differentiate.
Yeah. It also reinforces the idea that it's something I've experienced when I talk to successful artists, which is most of them are also music nerds or also have very encyclopedic knowledge of where they came from. Obviously I can't say everyone, but he clearly was knowledgeable about music.
Sure. I would say Billy Idol was kind of a cool hunter. He had an instinct for what was going to pop next, and he kind of moved in that direction, which was impressive. That's a skill. Many of our best pop stars, Madonna, certainly Bowie, Taylor Swift to an extent, they're cool hunters, and they move in directions, and you want to follow them because they're doing interesting stuff.
Mm-hmm. The near misses episode was really fascinating. In your now multiple decade chart analyst view, what are some sort of meta or high level learnings or conclusions you can draw about the charts over time? Or what are some things you might say are either truisms or observations? That's question one. And question two is, how do you factor in, or how do you think about payola?
Yeah. Corruption has always been part of the music business. There's kind of low-level corruption and high-level corruption. I consider the high-level corruption really more the stuff that went on decades ago, where the early days of Payola, or the way certain artists, many of them black artists, were robbed of their royalties. If you read Frederick Dannen's book, Hitmen, it'll make your toes curl, some of the stories he tells about the involvement of organized crime in the music business. And to this day, if the music business can find a loophole in the chart rules, they will use it. One of the things I wrote about was about the practice that became rampant in the 2010s of bundling albums with tickets and eventually merchandise. It became really just a plague on the charts, where things were going to number one that really weren't about the album at all. They were about a sale of an album tied to a ticket promotion. It started innocently enough with a Prince album back in 2004, where Prince on his Musicology tour was giving away copies of the Musicology CD, and somehow his people talked Billboard into counting that for the charts. And almost immediately they came to regret it because the CDs were being given away for free. So people were not even opting in or paying anything for them. And Billboard said, all right, at the very least, we've got to have a rule where you have the option not to have the CD and it's got to cost you something. And they kept tweaking the rules to try and make it more quote unquote honest. But the business kept driving, Mack trucks through the loopholes and finding ways to make the option so invisible that it barely even qualified, such that eventually, by around 2020, Billboard all but shut down the bundling entirely. And that's what's legal. That's a point I often make to people, is that the thing about the charts is you should, I don't know if outraged is the right word, but your eyes should pop at what's legal, not what's illegal, not money and cocaine being slipped under the table. A lot of what qualifies as radio payola nowadays, and, it involves horse trading of, if you play our record more, we'll give you this artist for your Jingle Ball concert or stuff like that. As we get better data, we learn more about human nature and about how popularity functions. Everybody divides chart history into before SoundScan and after SoundScan. For those who don't know, SoundScan is the technology that was employed on the charts starting in 1991, where Billboard for the first time had actual sales counts of records being sold thanks to barcode scanners at record stores, the thing you use at the supermarket or the drugstore. That was hot new technology in 1991. And so for the first time, the charts were really accurate because Billboard was actually getting a piece count of how many copies that Mariah Carey CD sold in any given week. What was sort of faulty about the charts prior to this was that the fault in the charts was less about corruption. It was more about a lack of data. The technology didn't exist for Billboard to have piece count data. So, for example, one story I often tell is in 1989, the rapper Tone Lōc should have had a #1 hit with the song Wild Thing. There were certain radio stations that thought the song was too ribald or raw, and it only got to #5 on the radio side of the Hot 100 formula. But on the sales side of the Hot 100 formula, not only was Wild Thing a #1 record, it was #1 by like a factor of 3 to 5. You know, it was outselling everything in the top 20 practically. If Billboard had had accurate piece counts in 1989, regardless of how much airplay Wild Thing got, those awesome sales numbers would have made Wild Thing probably a 2-month #1 hit. That's a pretty safe assumption. But because we didn't have the data, it goes down in history as a #2 hit. I think it peaked at #2 behind Like a Prayer by Madonna. Not a bad record, by the way, but it probably should have been a #1 hit for at least a week, if not a month. So better data changes our perceptions of what hits are. And now the best data we have is streaming data, because prior to the streaming era, really prior to the 2010s, all we knew was whether you bought a record or whether you heard it on the radio. We had no data about once you bought a record, how much you actually played it. If you bought a CD and then it was a beer coaster and you never played it once, we had no idea. That would be functionally equivalent on the charts to a CD that somebody brought home and played 1,000 times. What we learned when we added streaming data to the charts in the late aughts, and really for all intents and purposes, the 2010s, once Spotify comes to America, was that certain types of records get played a lot. It changes our whole understanding of what hit songs are. This renaissance of Christmas music that's happened in the last decade, that's entirely because of streaming. Because you're not going to buy another copy of White Christmas by Bing Crosby or All I Want for Christmas Is You by Mariah Carey or Last Christmas by Wham. You're not going to buy that every year, but you are going to play it at your Christmas parties, on your phone, in the car, whatever. You're going to play that record intensively from the week before Thanksgiving to the week after Christmas. We now have the data to track that, and as a result, Mariah Carey has a #1 hit every Christmas without fail, because we now have the data to track that. We didn't have that prior to the streaming era.
Are there things in the data, since the charts have been even more data informed, are there other surprises or myth and folklores that we've become disabused from?
This is now going back decades, but one thing we discovered once the charts got computerized in 1991 with the SoundScan system, the way I like to shorthand it is albums open like movies. We used to think that an album would debut somewhere in the middle of the chart and rise to #1. That's not what happens. Think about the movie box office, right? When The Odyssey opens, it doesn't start at #10 at the box office and climb to #1. It's a blockbuster. It opens at #1. The same thing goes for a new Bruce Springsteen album or a new Whitney Houston album or a new Mariah Carey album. They open at #1. Many albums' best week or highest charting week is its first week. We didn't have that data prior to 1991. That's one thing. When the Hot 100 was computerized later in 1991, and there they had to computerize multiple streams of data because, again, the Hot 100 averages radio airplay as well as sales. We discovered that songs can kind of lurch and yo-yo up and down the charts. Songs on the Hot 100 used to have these very tidy climbs. They would climb up the chart and peak and then fall back down very tidily. What we discovered was that, especially if it's a song by a superstar, it may debut really high, fall off for a few weeks, and then climb back up, sometimes even to #1, once the more passive fans catch on to it, because we now have more accurate data telling us the way songs are consumed. One other thing we've learned in the streaming era more recently, the charts have gotten a lot slower. That may sound counterintuitive. You would think streaming data would make the charts more rapid, but in fact, once a song catches on with the public, they'll just keep streaming it for months longer than anybody would have guessed. The song that's been number one for most of the spring and summer this year, Choose in Texas by country star Ella Langley, it's now in its 14th week at number one, mostly because people really love that song. And if there's nothing new by Taylor Swift or Drake or Olivia Rodrigo to interrupt it, that Ella Langley song just drifts back to number one and sits there for a couple more weeks. That's probably a closer approximation of the way music consumption works.
At what point do you think the charts started to reflect the media fragmentation that we've all come to accept as a truism? Like you mentioned Ella Langley. Now, granted, let's factor me in for age.
Sure.
I've never heard the song that I'm aware of, and that's a 14-week number one. I don't think I would have been able to avoid a number one 20 or 30 years ago, even if I wanted to.
I think the monoculture lasted through about the 1980s. Now, I've had arguments with millennials and Zoomers that they think I knew all the hits on the Hot 100, or I knew all the hits in the top 10 when I was this age, and now I don't know any of them. And they think culture was more monolithic when they were younger. I think we all have this vision that when we were teenagers or 20-somethings, everybody knew all the big hits, and now nobody does. And I'm no better. I knew the hits of the 80s better than I knew the hits of the 2000s or 2010s. But I will say that I started to notice atomization of culture by the 90s. Right around when charts got more accurate thanks to SoundScan. You started to see that you had the gangster rap fans and the pure pop fans and the grunge fans, and ne'er the twain shall meet. There was some crossover, but folks kind of lived in their own little pockets. And that's only accelerated every decade since. Then on the other hand, every Christmas when Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree by Brenda Lee and All I Want for Christmas Is You by Mariah Carey go back to number one, suddenly we're a monocultural country again. So it kind of waxes and wanes. But I feel like we've been atomizing for some time now. In the case of Ella Langley in particular, only because I brought it up and you repeated it, country music is an interesting example because if we were having this conversation in, I don't know, Arkansas, that's the oral wallpaper that surrounds everybody. They consider George Strait as a guy who's had 50 number one hits. You know what I mean? If I asked the average person in New York City to name 5 George Strait songs, I bet they couldn't even get to 3. Country music has been its own world for a long time. The reason why we're seeing more country songs on the Hot 100, your Morgan Wallens, your Luke Combs, your Ella Langleys, is because we now have better data and country fans who were sort of the last to adopt streaming services. They're now on Spotify the same as the rest of us. So now these Ella Langley and Morgan Wallen records can compete with the Drake and Taylor Swift records in the top 10. And we realize, oh wow, Ella Langley is actually... She may mean nothing to somebody on the coasts, but in the middle of the country, Ella Langley is a megastar. We now have the data to show that.
Mm-hmm. When you did episode 100 and you talked about your own life with the charts, there was so much in your story that resonated for me. Listening to Kasem as a kid, trying to avoid having to go in the car somewhere during the top 5 or whatever. I needed to know for whatever reason. Writing them down in notebooks. Sunday morning to me was like listening to the top 40.
Oh, yeah.
And in fact, I think that's probably around when I managed to stop going to church. But you called Kasem the original poptimist. What is poptimism? What's the risk in that, or what's the benefit of it being a commentator and a critic, right? It seems like it serves a bit of a biasing function.
Well, poptimism has been a source of much controversy in the pop criticism world. Frankly, the fact that I just said pop criticism, by the way, and not rock criticism says a lot, right? As recently as 2 decades ago, you would have called what I do rock criticism. And rock, to use a term, I'll borrow it, I think, from either my friend Jody Rosen or my friend Douglas Walk, who are both critics. One of them used the word to describe rock. Rock was considered sort of the median or the mean, the norm for what current popular music was. And we've kind of pulled away from that notion in the last 20 to 25 years, partially because hip hop overtook rock as the music of youth and the music of rebellion, but partially also because we've become more progressive in our understanding that the so-called high and low that separated somebody who plays a guitar from somebody who uses Pro Tools and a synthesizer in terms of their cultural value, that's loaded with all sorts of intersectional falderall that we needed to move past. I was being a bit glib when I called Kasem the original poptimist. I was being a bit cute. What I meant was, to the extent Casey cared about the songs he counted down, and there's evidence that he cared only to a point. You know, he was already in his 40s, I think, by the time AT40 was in its peak, and he probably went home and played Mantovani for all we care. It's not like the guy went home and played Madonna. He understood that all different kinds of music should bump up against each other. That's what made for great radio and great entertainment. When you talk to baby boomers, and to an extent my fellow Gen Xers, about what they loved about radio when they were younger, they would say that you heard more different kinds of stuff back to back with each other. You know, in the 60s, you could hear a James Brown record back to back with a Beatles record. In the 80s, you could hear Van Halen's Jump back to back with When Doves Cry by Prince. There was a little more variety and a little less narrow casting. When you were asking me before, when did we all kind of atomize? One thing that happened in the 90s was that radio in particular got very demographically focused, such that, oh, we're only focused on 25 to 39-year-old females or whatever. Casey Kasem's American Top 40, what made it cool was that they were playing all 40 records in the top of the Hot 100, regardless of their genre. And frankly, they got pushback from the radio stations that were running the show. Like, can we have a version of the show that doesn't play the country music? Or can we have and for the first roughly 20 years the show was on the air, they said, no, this is it. This is the show. They finally caved. As so many things happen, rap forced the issue by the end of the 80s. As songs like Me So Horny by Two Live Crew made the top 40. The idea of Casey Kasem counting down Me So Horny was unthinkable to the producers of American Top 40.
It's like performance art.
Yeah. Rather than just kind of expurgate all the rap, what they did was they switched the chart they were counting down, and they counted down a radio chart, which was more focused on top 40 airplay. I didn't like that. In fact, I wrote to Billboard in 1991, as I talked about in that episode, to complain about the fact that they weren't counting down the Hot 100 anymore. To some degree, it was sort of demographically destined that it couldn't last forever. You know, this is why we can't have nice things.
Yeah.
It lasted as long as it lasted. And I'm pleased that for about 18 years or so, American Top 40 really was counting down the top 40 records on the Hot 100.
It's so funny that you were a letter writer, because I have very specific instances as a young person coming up as a music fan where I was either moved out of outrage or fandom to write a letter.
Yeah.
But your point about the diversity in the top 40 and it being on the radio was so important to me as a kid. Like, it was a lifeline and it was everything. Whether it was Dr. Demento hidden on a Sunday night when I was supposed to be going to bed, or I can remember going to public radio and listening to like new age shows, and like radio started the musical journey I'm still on, hands down, at all ends of the dial. But the top 40 in particular, I think about music I might not otherwise have come by, right? I don't know that I would have known about Eddie Rabbitt or Juice Newton or that sort of country pop of the early 80s. I don't know if I would have heard that music as a kid who was getting into like classic rock.
Absolutely.
You don't strike me as somebody who gets hung up on the notion of guilty pleasures.
I don't. I like to say I don't believe in guilty pleasures. I'm a bit of a hypocrite when I say that, because sometimes I'm a little sheepish when I admit some of the things I like.
Yeah.
Generally, I feel like you like what you like. It's all grist for the mill. It's all pop to some extent. Ideally, you want it all to be mixing up together. For about just shy of 30 years now, I've been putting together an annual mix that I call my summer mix. And it's basically my dream radio station. It's all popular songs, but it's much wider ranging than any radio playlist. And it's kind of like anything that's like penetrating the culture right now, I put in my summer mix. I am a firm believer that it should have a little bit of country music and a little bit of pop music and a little bit of hip hop and a little bit of rock. There should be interesting juxtapositions. You know, I discovered one year when I did, I think it was the 2020 mix, I discovered that a record by country artist Maren Morris sounded really good coming out of a record by DaBaby and Roddy Ricch. You know, like a rap song into a country song sounded natural, because I feel like ideally this is what we're all doing. If you ask most people, you know, what kind of music do you like? They'll say all different kinds. And when you scratch the surface a little further, well, do you like country music? Oh, no, I don't like that. People aspire to liking a little bit of everything. I feel that what's great about radio, ideally, is that it's exposing us to a little bit of everything. That's healthy for us. I like the fact that more country music has wound up in the Hot 100 and in the top 10 this decade, because I think more of us should be exposed more to country music. And I say that as a coastal liberal blue stater, but we dismiss that music. But there's so much great music being made by country stars, and it should be part of the stew, ideally.
Yeah, country's fascinating because I don't think of myself as someone that's really listened to country pop in that post Garth Brooks era. We're around the SoundScan era, right? When SoundScan made everybody realize that country was was selling the way hip hop was.
Huge.
It's there in the lineage of rock and roll, right? And it's all the artists that a lot of us look back to, they all acknowledge the role that more roots and traditional American country music played. But it's also interesting the way modern music has seeped its way now into country, whether it's the power ballad or hard rock or dance and hip hop.
Rap beats are in country music. Morgan Wallen uses trap beats on probably half of his hits. The same beats that are powering a song by Future or Pick Your Rapper are powering hits by folks like Morgan Wallen. Jason Aldean was rapping on a #1 country hit back in 2010. These tools are available to everybody. And I love the fact that our most imperial star, Taylor Swift, started out in country music because she determined this is the medium that's going to let me be a singer-songwriter and have hits. And she leveraged that for a few years. And then she felt, well, you know what? I think I want to make pop music. I even want to make music that has hip hop infused into it. But she's just scored a #1 hit this summer that is getting played on country radio again, this song from Toy Story 5. It's part of the overall fabric of American music. And I like that they're coming back together again.
It's interesting about that hit because it seems like once you leave country, it's hard to get back. It could be just like you can't deny her, but country radio is pretty good about keeping out people once they turn their back on them. And it's amazing that she's gotten that hit on that chart.
I write a series for Slate called Why Is This Song #1? And when that song, I Knew It, I Knew You, reached #1, I wrote about not only the fact that it was #1 on the pop chart, that wasn't all that interesting. Anything Taylor Swift releases, she's going to get a #1 hit out of it. But the fact that it was embraced by country radio so rapidly, that is unusual because you're right. Country radio gatekeeps more than most genres, and it's cultural as much as it is musical. If they believe that you are not one of us, they won't play it. And they are very wary of carpetbaggers, whether it's Jewel trying to have a country hit or Bon Jovi trying to have a country hit. They are very selective over who they'll let over the fence, so to speak. I did a book a few years ago about Old Town Road, the Lil Nas X song. It was not my idea to write this book. I was approached by Duke University Press, and I had written a lot about Old Town Road for Slate for my Why Is This Song #1 series. They said, would you like to write a book about this? And I realized that Old Town Road was a perfect prism to talk about the history of charts, the history of genre, the history of race and genre. What happened to Old Town Road in 2019, where it was briefly on the country charts, and then folks in Nashville complained and Billboard yanked it from the country charts. That is the Nashville industrial complex in full effect. They're very wary of people poking fun at them, not being true adherents to the genre. They were very skeptical of Beyonce trying country music. And of course, race is a factor as well.
Does country have the same history of novelty songs breaking through on their charts the way the pop chart does?
Absolutely. Think of anything from Take This Job and Shove It to If I Said You Had a Beautiful Body, Would You Hold It Against Me? There's a great history of country music novelty records. They've got a great sense of humor. And it's a lyrics first genre. There's so much room to play with words in country music.
Yeah. Talk to me about something you consider a guilty pleasure or that you feel self-conscious about laying claim to that you like. For me, it's Journey.
Journey is interesting, right? Because post The Sopranos, when Don't Stop Believin' became one of our most shared cultural artifacts, younger generations don't see anything wrong with Journey. Zoomers don't see anything wrong with Toto's Africa, a ridiculous song, but kind of a great song, as dumb as the lyrics of that song are. And by the way, the members of Toto know it's dumb too. If you read interviews with them, they're like, David Page brought us this song where he's like, I've never been to Africa, but I have all these ideas of what Africa should be. And they recorded the song and they stuck it at the very end of their album, and it turned out to be the biggest hit they ever had. Yeah, I don't know what I should consider a guilty pleasure. Owning up that there were one or two Nickelback songs I liked, because I mostly think Nickelback are schlock. I have to admit that How You Remind Me, their biggest hit, is kind of a jam. That's sort of embarrassing. In the episode that you were talking about where I did my 100th episode and I talked about my personal history, the first song that I was able to name and say that's going to be a #1 hit was Bruce Hornsby and the Ranges, The Way It Is. I have loved that song for 40 years. It's now the 40th anniversary of that song. It went to #1 in 1986. That is a resolutely square song. It was square even in 1986. I love the fact that it got sampled by Tupac Shakur and turned into Changes in the 1990s. And by the way, it's been sampled by multiple rappers since Tupac. You know, rappers kind of retroactively made Bruce Hornsby and the Range cool in a way they weren't in 1986. That's the sort of stuff that, like, you're supposed to be sheepish about loving, but I don't know. There's a limit to how sheepish I can feel.
Yeah, me as well. I agree with you. Like, you like what you like. I think what Bon Jovi is for you, James Taylor is for me. James Taylor gives me stomach cramps.
Interesting. Okay. Is it across the board? It's his voice, it's his guitar playing, the whole nine?
You know what really gets me about him? When he tries to be like a bluesman, I'm just like, what are you talking about?
Oh, God, yeah. Even I'm a little embarrassed by Steamroller.
I can't tease out the Carly Simon stuff. He doesn't strike me as really being a kindly, gentle guy.
Did you like his guest voice on The Simpsons where he gets like pissed off at Homer Simpson and like talks shit?
You know, I'm sure I saw it, but I don't remember. But I'm going to say yes because that I would appreciate that.
Right.
He bothers me.
So even Fire and Rain, like no use for it.
I don't know. It's just so trite. I don't know.
Yeah, all right, fair enough.
What happened for you with Bon Jovi? Did you always hate it?
I actually wrote an article about this about 15 years ago when I was a freelancer for the Village Voice. They did a series called First Worst, where they wanted you to do a little essay about the first time you remember, you know, usually as a teenager, I don't like this. What was it? Okay, first of all, I've never liked John Bon Jovi's voice. Even when he's singing well, the quality of his voice has always rubbed me the wrong way. There's something cultural mixed into it because I am half Italian American on my mom's side. There's something about the New Jerseyness, the bridge and tunnelness of it has always felt hokey to me in a way that only I can recognize because I am from a similarly hokey milieu. Something about it really strikes me as phony. Also, I have called Bon Jovi's music captain of the football team music. It came out when I was in high school, and it was the music loved by cheerleader types or the football player types. It was sort of like music for the people who won the birthright lottery. That was always my vibe on Bon Jovi, and I never got over it.
He doesn't have an Italian bone in his body.
And yet his name is John Bon Jovi.
Well, that's the other thing, too, though. Like, he changed his name, and that's like...
That should piss me off. In a way, it's almost the sort of base Italianness, and I can say this as an Italian-American myself, that somehow just rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah. He was the opening act for the first concert I ever walked out of. I actually made it through his set. He was the opening act for Rat.
Wow.
And this was like, you know, I don't know, whatever year that would have been, 1984? I don't know. I was already agitated after sitting through him. I think I had realized at that point, it's like, oh, Rat only has one song.
Okay.
And I have to do this for 90 minutes?
Round and Round is a great pop metal song. I love
Great
Round
song.
and Round.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, they never had anything remotely that good. Like Lay It Down is not as good. Any of their other subsequent hits were not as good.
Yeah, it's funny because Bon Jovi is the kind of artist I should like because I like power pop, I like hard rock.
Yes.
He's adjacent to so many things I like.
The thing is, I actually like a lot of pop metal. And not just the respected stuff like Guns N' Roses. I like Poison, Poison for crying out loud. Like I could probably name 5 or 6 Poison songs I genuinely like.
That's funny.
And yet, I don't know, Bon Jovi just does not work for me.
Well, I'm glad to be able to share in that. I'm glad to be able to get James Taylor off my chest because
Good for you.
I think if I had to write my version of that column you just talked about, mine would definitely be James Taylor. I can remember being a kid and being like, why does everybody like James Taylor? I don't get it. And then feeling like I'm supposed to like him, that raises my hackles. That now I'm going to dig in.
I mean, my sister loves folk music and 60s music and 70s music, and she mostly can't stand Joni Mitchell. And people look at her like she's nuts. Like, how do you like all this stuff and you don't like Joni Mitchell? Because I just don't. And it's like, you got to let people have their broccoli or whatever, the thing that just doesn't work for them.
If you're going to let them like what they like, you got to let them dislike what they dislike, I guess.
Exactly.
That's all fair. Chart analyst Pop Critic Are you the first one? And if not, is there a lineage you see yourself within? Like tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I often say it's a title I made up. And it's not as if I have no predecessors at all. It's more that joint beat, chart analyst and pop critic, the way I phrase it, that's what is sort of bespoke. What I noticed, I've been writing about music in some form or another since high school. But, for the first decade and a half that I was doing it, pretty much the only game in town was reviewing rock records. And, when I wrote record reviews for CMJ in the 90s, I managed to review rap records and some pop records. So it wasn't as if it was all just indie rock. Rock was normative. This was sort of the last decade of rockism, if you will. My love of the charts was sort of the love that dare not speak its name. It was not considered cool to be as into Billboard and as into the charts as I was. What I often say about my beat is that a couple of things had to get invented for my beat to make sense in the 21st century. Blogging had to be invented. Podcasting had to be invented. Blogging because it sort of aggregated niche interests in a way that the internet revealed that people actually care about stuff that you think is niche and uninteresting and nerdy and weird. So I started hanging around a music blog from the Gawker empire, back when Gawker was an empire, called Idolater. And they noticed that I wrote fairly authoritatively about the charts. And they finally said to me, would you like to do some guest posts for us? And eventually I said to them, hey, listen, if I wrote about the charts every week, would you pay for that? And they said, yeah, we would publish that. And so they paid me to write a column that I called 100 and Single. And what occurred to me at that time was that you had these music critics, rock critics, pop critics. These people were very important to me. I started reading Rolling Stone in the 80s, just like most teenagers. And they would occasionally talk about the charts, but only as kind of a sideline, an addendum to what they did. But they wrote like critics. And then you had the people who wrote about the charts, whether it's the people who actually wrote for Billboard, who were explaining what happened on the charts every week, or Fred Bronson, the guy who wrote the Billboard Book of #1 Hits, or Paul Grine, who wrote the original chart beat column in Billboard. They did phenomenal research. Fred Bronson, in particular, interviewed so many artists for his Billboard Book of #1 Hits. That's such a beautifully researched book. But they didn't really try to write like critics. And it occurred to me that if you could analyze the charts like somebody who wrote for Billboard, but you wrote like a critic with a little bit of wit and snark and piercing cultural analysis, that was new. Nobody was doing that. And so I sort of made up this beat for me. To this day, when All Things Considered on NPR or some newspaper needs somebody who understands how the charts work but can talk about them like a critic, they tend to call me, which is nice. It's like a beat that I made up.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm a fan and admirer both of that approach and of the work itself, and I very much appreciate you making time to do this. I would love to do it again someday, so I hope we get to.
I hope we get to, too. This was great, Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris Molanphy, and thank you for tuning into the Tonearm. If you enjoyed this conversation, I know you'll like at least one of the more than 300 episodes available in our free archive at thetonearm.com. The Tonearm is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson, and our theme music is by Birdie. Thanks for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.
The Tonearm podcast comes from the Tonearm, an online journal of experimental and underground culture. Current features include Brazilian-German Tropicalia duo Curio Curio, sample collage songwriter Mythmath, and synthesist Dana Lōc of The Comet is Coming. The Tonearm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.